At the beginning of 1990, with the WWF dominating the business with its superhero presentation, and WCW struggling to keep up as a cheap imitation, three men found an opening to stage a wrestling show that put the focus on professional wrestling. The kind of wrestling that built the Jim Crockett Promotions empire, and made the Mid-Atlantic region a hotspot for the sport. Together with a roster of young and old alike, they would try to recapture the Crockett magic, without a single member of the family involved. This is Defunct Championship Wrestling Episode 22, the story of the North American Wrestling Association, aka South Atlantic Pro Wrestling. In the 1960s and 70s, there were few promotions as successful as Jim Crockett Promotions in Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling. Stars like Wahoo McDaniel, Johnny Valentine, Roddy Piper, and Ric Flair helped make the Carolinas a destination for fans and wrestlers. In 1973, Jim Crockett Sr. passed away suddenly, leaving the JCP company and its various entertainment enterprises to his children, Jim Jr., David, and his daughter Frances. The wrestling operations, however, was initially passed on to Frances's husband, John Ringley. Ringley had learned the wrestling business from Big Jim himself. Ringley was an excellent salesman, and used that background to his benefit when it came to meshing the carny world of wrestling with the outside business world, similar to what Eric Bischoff would do almost 20 years later. At the urging of Ringley, the family brought in former wrestler George Scott to be the booker for Mid-Atlantic. Not long after bringing in George Scott, Ringley was caught having an affair with a Miss Tennessee contestant. The rest of the family voted him out of the business, and Frances soon divorced him. George Scott would stay on board, and his reign as booker would see Mid-Atlantic grow to even greater success, as they elevated younger stars like Greg Valentine, Jimmy Snuka, and Ricky Steamboat. Throughout the 80s, George Scott would bounce around as a booker from Mid-Atlantic to the WWF to WCCW, until finally returning to the now Turner-owned WCW in 1989. This stint wouldn't last long, as Scott was now firmly behind the times in the eyes of many. He would be fired after Clash of the Champions 6 in April of 1989. The event only drew about 5,300 fans, which was mostly freebies in the New Orleans Superdome. The blame was placed on Scott's refusal to promote the show on syndication, out of fear that it would hurt the gate at the house shows where the Flair Steamboat rematches were planned. As we've discussed many times on this channel, by 1990 the WWF was without question the market leader in pro wrestling. And as we've also discussed many times in this series, a lot of the old-time promoters and wrestlers didn't much appreciate this fact. Together, the salesman, the booker, and a businessman named Mike Lamberth decided to start a promotion that could bring back the glory days of Mid-Atlantic wrestling. All I know about Lamberth is that he provided some initial funding with a $100,000 investment, so we'll use Bash from Glow as a stand-in. In January 1990, North Carolina attorney Francis Pickney filed a trademark for South Atlantic Pro Wrestling. A couple weeks later, in February 1990, South Atlantic Pro Wrestling Inc. started running shows and TV tapings under the North American Wrestling Association banner, the NAWA. The shows featured familiar faces for the Mid-Atlantic audience like Bob Orton Jr. and Ivan Koloff. NAWA also featured young stars that would later become some of the most recognizable names of the 90s. Vince Torelli, who would become Ken Shamrock, War Eagle Chris Chavis, who would become Tatanka, and the Nasty Boys, who would become the Nasty Boys. But without a doubt the biggest star for NAWA was Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. Steamboat had left WCW in August of '89, leaving him available to work for NAWA. I believe Steamboat was living in the Carolinas at the time, so working close to home a couple times a month for a booker that gave him his first major push must have been enticing for the Dragon. March 1990, the NAWA TV starts airing Saturdays or Sunday afternoons depending on the market. They also started promoting the company via newspaper interviews, where they promised to get wrestling back to the basics. A strategy that has always worked out anytime I've seen it. The TV actually is pretty basic though. It's mostly jobber squashes, but they're long enough to actually see what type of a wrestler someone is. Like in Ken Shamrock matches. They really show off his mat wrestling and his submission holds and his suplexes. The matches with younger talents are obviously a bit more entertaining than, say, an Ivan Koloff match. The lead play-by-play man is Ted Webb, and he's pretty good. Definitely puts over the stars well. He's joined by a revolving door of color commentators like Big John Studd, who's actually okay on commentary.
Look at Steamboat. He's confident. He has his opponent's eyes up. Pow, right in the head. You could tell the force by that Steamboat hit him by the way Landell hit that mat.
The ricochet was unbelievable.
They drove him right off his feet.
Ron West counted.
He tried to kick out, didn't have it.
And it is all over. Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, don't go away. Coming up next.
Johnny Weaver is not great as a color commentator. Sounds like he has peanut butter in his mouth.
Boom! Off the side of the face. What a tremendous move this is. And Dennis Fowler thought he was going to have an easy night with the way that they were beating up on Butch Malone. He's got him up for that superplex.
I think Fowler found out why Malone was in so much trouble.
Whoa, from the top rope.
And the various active wrestlers that do a decent job. NAWA has a really good strategy of pairing newer talents with established names to help get that rub with the audience. Vince Torelli has Paul Jones as a manager. Baron Samedi has Bob Orton Jr. as an unlikely tag partner. They also pair Chris Chavis and Bo Reagan with Ricky Steamboat. Massive seal of approval for folks at home, I'm sure. NAWA scored time on mid-Atlantic area stations like WGGT-TV, Channel 48, and on former Crockett stations, purchasing the same time slots once occupied by JCP. Even WBTV Channel 3, whose studio was at one time the home for the Mid-Atlantic TV tapings. Since TV was heavy on jobber matches, they saved the big matches for house shows at high schools and also buildings that had been used by Mid-Atlantic in the past, and by WCW just 2 years before, like the Spartanburg Memorial Auditorium in South Carolina, the Grady Cole Center in Charlotte, North Carolina, and the Danville City Auditorium in Virginia. In April, they add Mark Fleming to the roster. He's definitely a throwback wrestler. A throwback to even before the heyday of JCP. And the fans certainly weren't on board.
Oh, it's always a pleasure for every wrestling fan throughout the world to see Ricky the Dragon Steamboat.
Mr. North Carolina, 1982 to be exact. Right about now, David Sledge has realized that he is completely out-talented in the ring.
And who better to manage this throwback wrestler in a throwback promotion than the legendary Lou Thesz? At the time, Fleming was billed as the International Heavyweight Champion. The physical belt is the same worn by Thesz and Ed Strangler Lewis when they were world champions. It's claimed Fleming was the International Heavyweight Champion from 1990 to 1992, but I can't find any matches that are listed as a championship match. So I think it was just a gimmick given to him by his trainer Thesz. Lou Thesz also does some color commentary while with the company. He's just fine in that role. Anytime Ted Webb tries to talk about anything other than a wrestling move, Thesz just politely comments and moves on. The spring would see some fresh faces come into the territory like Robert Fuller, Matt Bourne, Dean Malenko, and someone I became a big fan of, Curtis Thompson. He's a big guy with great charisma, just a great cocky heel. He's fast and a pretty good wrestler. His finisher is a hammerlock, but he works the shoulder pretty well beforehand. Big fan. He'd later become Firebreaker Chip in WCW. In June, they introduced the North American Heavyweight Championship, which will be their top title. The tournament would be won by Robert Fuller, who you may remember as Colonel Robert Parker from WCW. By August 1990, the original ownership of NAWA were ready to move on. George Scott allegedly lost $600,000 investing in NAWA. The promotion would be taken over by former Watts UWF promoter Frank Dusek and NAWA manager Paul Jones. The new owners would drop the NAWA name, opting to use the South Atlantic Pro Wrestling name. The change wouldn't take effect on TV until the September 22, 1990 edition of the show. Even then, it was only in the opening, as the other logos still had the NAWA branding. The ownership change, thankfully, didn't really change things creatively. It helped that one of the new owners was also involved in the main storyline of the show. The big feud of the summer being Paul Jones, War Eagle, Vince Torelli, and Ricky Steamboat versus the Stud Stable, consisting of Fuller, Matt Bourne, and the Nasty Boys. The feud would see several tag matches and single matches take place on the house shows. I love these storylines when babyfaces have to band together to take on a common enemy. In September, Ricky Steamboat would leave SAPW, returning to the WWF in March of '91. Starting with the October TV episodes, we would start to see some changes to how the show is presented. Frank Dusek replaces Ted Webb as our host and play-by-play man, probably cheaper to do it himself. They move to darker, dankier venues for tapings. I assume they're cheaper buildings. It makes the show look a lot more second-rate than it actually is. SAPW also start using this 2-cam setup at the start of the show, but no one is ever looking at the camera. It's really bad. Paul Jones returns to in-ring action as part of his feud with the Stud Stable, defeating Robert Fuller for the SAPW heavyweight title, only to lose it back on TV the very next episode. The new set of tapings also leads to some new pushes. Rockin' Rick debuts and gets a spot in the upper mid-card right away. Rick would eventually go on to become WCW's Renegade. The American Bulldogs turn heel and become the Pit Bulldogs, taking over the tag division. They would later find a canister of ooze and become ECW's Pit Bulls. Speaking of tag teams, the Fultons come into the promotion. The future Midian Tex Salinger debuts and is immediately thrown into the Stud Stable. SAPW also advertised that Cactus Jack is coming to the territory. They said he was coming. They aired a video package. Then he never showed up. I assume they realized they couldn't afford him? The promotion, even with all its flaws, was maintaining consistent houses with a few hundred people each show, and nearing 1,000 fans for some TV tapings. But if you've ever heard of NAWA or SAPW before, chances are it's not for its solid TV wrestling. It's for the incident between Ken Shamrock and the Nasty Boys. This version is pieced together from the accounts of Shamrock, Sags, and Robert Fuller. I've tried to exclude anything that hasn't been consistent over the years, and any differences will be mentioned. As the story goes, in late 1990, the Nasty Boys were finishing up with SAPW and heading to WCW. While at a bar after a show, the Nasty Boys were really tying one on, getting absolutely plastered. Shamrock was there hanging out with a buddy from the SAPW crew. The buddy's girlfriend or fiancé was also there. Knobs and Sags, who were messing around being drunk idiots, came up to them and groped the girlfriend. She didn't appreciate it and the friend told them to knock it off. Shamrock stays out of it, letting his buddy handle his own business. The Nasties say that they were just joking around about the girlfriend being promiscuous and nothing more. According to Shamrock, Knobs grabbed her again. The friend gets pissed, the girlfriend gets pissed, and Shamrock steps in since the Nasties are two much larger dudes than the buddy. Shamrock tells them to knock it off, they exchange some words, and Knobs pie faces Shamrock. Incensed, Ken Shamrock goes after the Nasty Boys. The bouncers had already been monitoring the situation, and as soon as it escalated, they kicked out the Nasty Boys. Shamrock hung around the bar for another half hour, just absolutely fuming. Then he decides to say his goodnights and go give Knobs and Sags a piece of his mind. He goes to Robert Fuller's room to find out what room they're in. Because it's Ken Shamrock in a rage, he tells them where they are on the 3rd floor. Shamrock goes to their room, pounding on the door. Inside, Sags is on the phone home to his now wife. Knobs is on the bed, passed out from Jack Daniels and sleeping pills. No one answers, but Shamrock knows they're in there, so he forces his way in. According to Shamrock, he stopped when he saw Knobs on the bed, and that was the last thing he remembers. In that brief pause was all that Sags needed to smash a phone in the back of his head. And not the plastic shell of the phone, but the steel plate on the bottom of the phone. That's when Knobs jumped up and they started putting the boots to him, with their steel-toed boots. Jerry Sags' version of events is that Shamrock came through the door and started beating the crap out of an unconscious Knobs. That's when he started beating up Shamrock. While this is all happening, Robert Fuller is making his way down to the room to see what's going to happen. He could hear fist hitting flesh from down the hall. By the time he got to the room, Knobs was passed out on the bed and Sags was dragging Shamrock to the balcony to toss him over. Fuller pleaded with him not to do it, and Sags realized immediately what he was doing and stopped. Shamrock suffered a broken sternum, broken orbital bone, and a broken nose. The injuries were so severe he could have died. Robert Fuller said his head was the size of a basketball, it was so swollen. The cops came and everyone vouched for Sags, saying it wasn't a premeditated attack or anything, just a drunken fight. No one was arrested. Sags had said he didn't sleep that night, having what sounds like a panic attack. Knobs woke up the next morning and asked, "Did something happen last night?" It took Shamrock months to fully recover from his injuries. In 1997 or 98, Shamrock encountered the Nasties at an airport and had to be physically restrained by Billy Gunn.
And here comes Kenny. I went, oh, this is fixing to get good. And Kenny walked right up to him and just commenced to punking him. And he
all verbal at this time?
Yeah, oh, it's all verbal. And I'm going, Kenny, no, because in the airport you fight, it's federal and you're gone. And you're in big trouble. So I'm just trying to tell, but he's out of control. When he got like that, he was like, he was crazy. And I'd never seen him like that. He was just out of control.
By 1991, things are cruising along pretty well for SAPW. They're making enough money to at least stay afloat and keep TV on the air. They keep pushing young stars with the likes of Chris Chavis becoming SAPW champion. We also see some character growth in 1991, as Vince Torelli is now a heel and has a glorious slick back mullet.
You think this is slicked back? This is pushed back.
Curtis Thompson gets a bit of a makeover with a mailman gimmick. His nickname prior to this was US Mail because he always delivers. Which is very funny, but putting him in a mail carrier uniform is not the move. Look at how they massacred my boy! Honestly, I know it's not good, but it's just silly enough for me to enjoy it. The promotion also keeps loading up on more young talent, like Rob Van Dam. It's crazy to see him here and then in IWF. The improvement and growth as a wrestler in such a short time is insane. However, SAPW also brought back some names from the past, like Wahoo McDaniel and the Raging Bull Manny Fernandez, who I believe also took over as booker. Thankfully, the TV in late 1991 has some improvements. They get back to better lit buildings more often, and Bob Caudle joined the company. Which was excellent timing because by late 1991, SAPW found a home on Prime Ticket stations, a group of regional sports stations throughout the country. Prime Ticket featured tons of wrestling at various times in its existence. SAPW also supposedly aired on America One channels on Friday nights, but I can't find anything concrete about it. Even with all this positivity happening, SAPW would lose even more top names. In October, War Eagle Chris Chavis left the promotion, heading to the WWF to debut as Tatanka in January. Chavis had been doing WWF house shows all year, so they had to have known it was only a matter of time before he got signed. Evidenced by the fact that Manny Fernandez beat War Eagle for the SAPW title in August. Manny Fernandez would then leave the following month in November. Also leaving in November would be Ken Shamrock, opting to focus on Japan working for Pro Wrestling Fujiwara. With those departures, 1992 would see lots more changes to the company's roster. Tons of additions like Jeff Husker. He's from Nebraska. Get it? He's a Husker. The German Troopers with their manager Frank B. Cruel, and his bodyguard The Wall, who I'm pretty sure is Mabel. Looks like him, just a little slimmer. The Patriot also shows up with the GWF North American Championship. There doesn't appear to be any sort of formal working agreement though. And the Junkyard Dog debuts on TV as well. The bigger names like JYD and Patriot wouldn't stick around very long. By May 1992, the two biggest names SAPW had were Ivan Koloff and Wahoo McDaniel. No offense to these legends, but I don't think they were the answer in 1992. Especially for a promotion like SAPW that had always had its main focus on younger talents with huge upside. Even young guys like the TNT Express, Tommy Angel and Tommy Sebold. They could have stepped up and gotten a chance, but they also left. They had a guy Greg Bobchick on the roster. While he was an incredible athlete, his push might have been too little too late. As their star power diminished, the promotion continued to run live events, having to resort to that time-honored tradition of filling out cards with battle royals. On August 1st, 1992, SAPW held its final known event in Cerro Gordo, North Carolina, with upcoming scheduled events in Thompson, Georgia, and Spruce Pine, North Carolina the following week being cancelled. And that was the end of the North American Wrestling Association and South Atlantic Pro Wrestling. While the story of NAWA isn't one of a promotion with ridiculous ambitions or a promotion with weird gimmicks or matches, in my opinion, it's still an important story to tell. They tried to recapture the glory days of a promotion from a decade prior. But unlike companies with similar mission statements, NAWA for the most part didn't rely solely on the old guard. They pushed young talents hard. And considering where most of those pushed talents ended up, I think it's safe to say they had a good eye for future stars. They didn't try to take on the WWF and WCW. They simply wanted to fill a void in the market for fans that wanted a simpler wrestling-focused product. And for a couple of years, I think they did a really good job of that. Now, some of you may remember or may have just seen footage of SAPW being featured on ICW or IWCCW TV. Well, since the Savoldi family owns the library, I reached out to see how that happened. So apparently, Mike Lamberth still had a stake in the company after George Scott and John Ringley dropped out. In need of cash to run a TV taping, he reached out to IWCCW owner Mario Savoldi and floated the idea of SAPW partnering with IWCCW. Mario declined the offer but countered with giving Lamberth some cash in exchange for the rights to the SAPW tapes. After the deal was signed, Savoldi used some SAPW matches to fill out his episodes of TV. Once SAPW shut down for good, Mario received a box full of tapes with a note that said something along the lines of, "We're closed, do whatever you want with these." And you can now find several episodes of NAWA and SAPW TV in excellent quality on the Savoldi Library streaming service, Ultimate Classic Wrestling. You can also find some episodes and matches here on YouTube. As usual, I've linked a playlist of some of it in the description of this video. Remember, you can support the channel by subscribing and tracking us down on social media, either here or here. As always, please leave any thoughts you have about NAWA in the comments. And before you type it, no, this is not the same NAWA that featured Joey Styles, Taz, and others. That's a different story for another season. I'm Scott from WrestleSpective. Watch wrestling, love wrestling, thanks for watching.